Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I want to thank you for joining me today. This is episode number 81, the 1940s Superman cartoon, and the Fleischer Studio. First of all, I would like to apologize for the editing mistake at the beginning of the previous episode, number 80. I've corrected it and re-uploaded the episode to my podcast site, as well as the Gcast feed and the Internet Archive, to lift up the curtain and to show a little bit of the behind the scenes of the Superman Fan Podcast. The brief intro with the background theme music is pre-recorded, and then I put it at the beginning of the episode, and then I import the audio for the new episode, and then align the tracks so that one begins at the end of the other. And somehow I happened to miss that edit on the previous episode, because usually I don't always listen to the entire episode before I upload it, but I do play at least where the two audio files come together to make sure that one doesn't run into the other, or there's not too much dead space between the two audio files. So I have corrected that, and so a corrected episode 80 is now available. I have no news about my son, who is a Marine in Okinawa. Now today, being Wednesday, July 8th of 2009, I went to the comic store, which is Acme Comics in Longwood, and their website is acme-superstore.com, and I bought a Megalicious The Tick, The Rise of the Setting Sun, number 1 of 4. The Tick is one of my favorite superhero series and cartoons. I have the live action series from Fox, as well as the first 2 series of the animated Tick on DVD. And so I always like a new Tick story. Next, I bought one of the DC's After Watchmen What's Next reprints, and I got a reprint of Tom Strong number 1, which was written by Alan Moore, and can't go wrong there. And I also bought Superman World of New Krypton number 5 of 12, and that was a doozy of a read. I didn't see the ending coming, and I'm, as I've said in the past, and on my pull list blog, I've said that the last couple of years have been about the best Superman stories I've read in a long time. And later this afternoon, I took my daughter to Lake Sumter Community College, which is the local 2-year college where I graduated from in 1980, way back when. I got an Associate of Science degree in Commercial Art. And while she is a high school senior, she was going to her new student orientation. I didn't go in with her, so to bide my time, I went to the campus library, where I registered my Lake County library card so that I could check books out from the campus library. And I was looking around, and I checked out the DC Comics, a celebration of the world's favorite comic book heroes by Les Daniels, and as well as Comics, that's Comix, A History of Comic Books in America, also by Les Daniels. I assume it's the same person. and Big Red, 3 months aboard a Trident nuclear submarine by Douglas C. Waller, um, which seems an odd combination of the three books, but I believe I saw this book presented by the author on Book TV on C-SPAN 2, I think it is. And I wanted to read about life aboard a confined ship like a submarine, in order to do a little research for a science fiction comic book I have, but nothing it's years down the road. So, but I wanted to get an idea of what a real ship was like, and that's all I have on that. Now, while I was in the library, I did read an issue of Starlog magazine, which I was surprised to see back when I was in high school, and for a couple of years after I graduated high school. I used to read it. I didn't realize it was still in publication, or perhaps it resumed publication. I'm not sure. But in either case, I believe it was the April 2009 issue. It had a big center section devoted to the Watchmen movie. But at the end, it had a really great article about an interview with Murphy Anderson. And that was a big treat for me. And that's all the news I have for myself. And let's get to the topic of the episode, the 1940 Superman cartoon and the Fleischer studio. As I mentioned at the beginning of episode 79, one of the things I got for Father's Day, other than a cool Action Comics t-shirt featuring the cover for Action Comics 23, I believe, I also got a copy of the latest DVD collection titled Max Fleischer's Superman 1941 to 1942, which was released on April 7th of 2009. It included a preview of the upcoming Warner Premiere direct-to-DVD animated movie Green Lantern, as well as special features on a history of superhuman characters through eons of literature, as well as a history of the Fleischer studio itself. The cartoons were reproduced from the original masters, and only a brief part of a scene of the Superman cartoon Terror on the Midway seemed a bit blurry or of poor quality after all these decades. But otherwise, this DVD set is perfect for any fan of animation or Superman in particular. And I thought I would interrupt my summer series on imaginary Superman stories to highlight these cartoons and the Fleischer studio which produced them. The Fleischer studio began as Inkwell Studios in 1921, founded by brothers Max and Dave Fleischer. Dave served as director and supervised production, and Max served as a producer. They gained their experience by working previously for J.R. Bray's Paramount Pictograph Film Magazine, which was a studio that produced silent cartoons to theaters beginning in 1916. Bray's studio went into business 2 years after Winsor McKay's Gertie the Dinosaur proved animation was practical, even though it was not the very first cartoon. That honor went to Humorous Phases of Funny Faces by J. Stuart Blackton in 1906. And probably if you went to YouTube or did a search online, you could probably find that cartoon on the internet where you could watch it yourself. In 1919, Max Fleischer invented the rotoscope, a device that allowed animators to trace the movement of live actors from film and incorporate them into a cartoon in order to provide the animated characters with more realistic movement. The first use of the rotoscope on a character was on the Max and Dave Fleischer's character Coco the Clown. brother Dave performed the actions that were animated by Coco, and Coco starred in the Out of the Inkwell series that began uh, in 1919 as well. And it was in 1921 that the Fleischers left Braze to form their partnership. Along with Coco, the Fleischers created a series of characters including anthropomorphic characters. Their most famous creation ever was Betty Boop, who premiered in the cartoon Dizzy Dishes, which was released to theaters on August 9th of 1930. The brothers competed with Walt Disney with their own short cartoons during this early era of animation's history. And the Fleischer brothers were innovators in this early era of animation. Many of their innovations are in use today. They were the first to use in-betweeners, and how that would work, and how it still works, is that the main animator would draw the first and last drawings of a particular motion, and an assistant animator would draw the in-between drawings of that particular movement. The Fleischers also produced the first the bouncing ball sing-along cartoon during the early days of the sound cartoon. Their first sound cartoons were called Talkatoons, which premiered in 1929. And the Fleischers' 3D setback, which was a tiny stage where animation cells were hung in front of the background to create a 3D effect, were as effective as Disney's multiplane camera, which they used on many of their early feature-length animated films. And after Betty Boop, the Fleischer studio got the rights to King Features Syndicate's Popeye, who premiered in 1933 in the cartoon Betty Boop Meets Popeye the Sailor. In October of 1938, the Fleischer studio moved to new facilities in Miami, Florida, financed by Paramount Studios, to take advantage of tax breaks and to end union activity after a bitter strike in 1937. The Fleischers also competed with Disney in the area of feature-length animated films. The Fleischers produced two of them after Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered in 1937, and at least Gulliver's Travels, I know, used the rotoscoping technique, and Gulliver's Travels premiered in 1939, and Mr. Bug Goes to Town, later to be released under the title Hoppity Goes to Town in 1941. When Paramount, the Fleischer's studio distributor, gained the rights to the Superman character, they wanted the Fleischers to produce a series of cartoons about the Man of Steel. But believe it or not, the Fleischer studio was in the middle of production on their second feature-length movie and didn't want to tackle this new project because of the challenge of showing the Man of Steel flying. In an attempt to discourage Paramount from deciding to go forward with the series, they quoted a price which, depending on which source you want to believe, was from $30,000 to perhaps $100,000. But much to the Fleischer's surprise, Paramount accepted their bid. The first cartoon, simply titled Superman, cost about $50,000 to make, about 3 times the cost of the average Fleischer cartoon. The rest of the cartoons in the series cost $30,000 each, for a total of $530,000 in production costs. While some think that the Superman catchphrase "look up in the sky" and "faster than a speeding bullet" originated with this animated series, they were introduced in the radio series. Bud Collyer reprised his role from the radio show as Clark Kent and Superman, as well as Jane Alexander, who voiced Lois Lane in the radio show and the cartoon. The narrator for the cartoon series was Jackson Beck, who was the narrator and voiced Perry White for the animated series, but he had no previous connection with the radio show. He would join the voice cast of the radio show later, and all three voice actors would reprise their roles for the 1960s Superman TV cartoon. The Fleischer Studio would receive 5 Academy Award nominations: Sinbad the Sailor from 1936, Educated Fish 1937, Hunky and Spunky and Riding the Rails both for 1938, and Superman, the first cartoon of the series, in 1941. Each year the studio lost to a Disney short cartoon, and only MGM would break Disney's Oscar streak in 1940 when the Fleischer Studio did not have a cartoon nominated. And when Superman lost, the Disney cartoon that they lost to featured Pluto. The 2 feature-length animated films the Fleischers produced did not make enough money to repay their loans to Paramount. This, along with the unexpected costs of the additional overhead of the Miami studio, would eventually cause Paramount to foreclose on the loan, take over the studio, and fire the Fleischer brothers. But by this point, the brothers were not talking to each other because of personal and professional differences. Paramount renamed the studio Famous Studios, and the first Superman cartoon produced under the Famous Studio name was the now considered xenophobic title Japatours, which was released on September 18th of 1942. And Famous Studios would also change the introduction from the familiar Faster Than a Speeding Bullet several times. In 1943, the studio would move back to New York City. And after the last Superman cartoon, I believe that the Fleischers produced a series of cartoons on Little Lulu, which were less expensive to produce. Max Fleischer would become head of the animated division of the Jam Handy corporate organization, which would produce films for business, education, government, and military. Dave Fleischer moved to California and became the head of Columbia Screen Gems cartoon studio. Now today there is a Fleischer studio which is located in Los Angeles, California. However, they don't produce any cartoons, but they handle the merchandise licensing of Betty Boop and other original Fleischer characters. And next I'll give a brief summary of all of I believe 17 of the Superman cartoons. Superman, the pilot cartoon, was released on September 26, 1941, with a running time of 10 minutes and 22 seconds. As I mentioned previously, this cartoon earned the last Academy Award nomination for the Fleischer Studios, and it lost to Disney's Linda Pa starring Pluto. After a brief origin portraying the last survivor of an exploding planet, rocketed to Earth as a baby, being found and turned into an orphanage, and growing up to be reporter Clark Kent, the story involved a mad scientist who threatened the city with a destructive ray at midnight. The second cartoon was The Mechanical Monster, released on November 28, 1941. It was 10 minutes 14 seconds long. And this cartoon was about another mad scientist who used an army of robots to rob the city on solo missions. Next was $Billion Limited, released on January 9th, 1942. It was 8 minutes and 35 seconds long, where Superman protected a train loaded with gold and bound for the National Mint from a masked gang who attempted to hijack the train and steal the gold. Then there was The Arctic Giant, released on February 27th, 1942, the same month and day of my son's birthday, which was in 1990, was 8 minutes 35 seconds long. A frozen dinosaur was discovered in Siberia and shipped to Metropolis to be displayed still frozen in a museum. After the refrigeration generator malfunctioned, the dinosaur awoke after the ice melted and threatened the city. Next was The Bulleteers, released on March 27th, 1942, 8 minutes and 2 seconds long. And the cartoon was about a gang who piloted a bullet-shaped flying car who terrorized and robbed Metropolis. And this cartoon included the first specific mention of the city of Metropolis. After that was The Magnetic Telescope, released on April 24th of 1942, 7 minutes 38 seconds long. Another mad scientist used a magnet on top of an astronomical observatory to pull celestial bodies closer to Earth for observation. One fell out of control and crashed into the city, coming to a stop in the water off of the docks of Metropolis, and the city authorities warned the scientist to stop his dangerous experiments. Next was Electric Earthquake, May 15th, 1942. It was 8 minutes 42 seconds long. A Native American scientist used an underwater base to cause earthquakes in Manhattan because the island rightfully belonged to Native Americans, in his opinion. This was a less objectionable portrayal of a minority because even though the villain was a Native American, he was brilliant, which differed from the portrayal of Native Americans in movies in this era. Also, there were no racial comments by any of the characters. When the Native American scientist told the planet staff about his claims, Clark asked, "Well, what do you want us to do about it?" The villain answered, "Print the truth." Next was Volcano, released on July 10th, 1942, 7 minutes and 56 seconds long. Clark and Lois covered the threatening eruption of Mount Mauna on an island, and Lois was trapped on the volcano's slope when it erupted, and a lava flow threatened the population. Next was Terror on the Midway, released on August 28th of 1942, 8 minutes 22 seconds long. Clark and Lois covered a circus where a giant gorilla escaped from its cage and terrorized the crowd. Next was the politically incorrect title Japatours, released on September 18th, 1942, 9 minutes and 5 seconds long. Japanese spies attempted to steal the world's largest bomber plane and fly it to Tokyo. This cartoon contained a typical racial caricature of Oriental people in this era. And as I mentioned before, this was the first Superman cartoon produced under the famous studio's name after Paramount took control of the studio. Next was Showdown, released on October 16th, 1942, 8 minutes and 14 seconds long. A criminal wore a Superman costume while performing robberies for his crime boss, who was based on Al Capone. The real Superman was wanted by the police for the crimes. Next was The 11th Hour. November 20th, 1942 was the release date. It was 7 minutes, 58 seconds long. Clark and Lois were held in a Yokohama hotel with barred windows. At 11 o'clock every night, Clark, as Superman, would remove the bars from his window and fly away to sabotage the Japanese military, and Lois would eventually face a firing squad as a spy. And this was another cartoon that continued the racial caricature of Oriental people, which was common in media of the era. Next was Destruction Inc., released on December 25th, 1942, Christmas Day. It was 8 minutes 32 seconds long. The body of a munitions plant guard was found in a swamp. Lois went undercover at the plant as an employee and was discovered by a shady manager and two of his henchmen. Next was The Mummy Strikes, released on February 19th, 1943, 7 minutes and 46 seconds long. An expert Egyptologist was found dead near the mummy of King Tush in a museum. His assistant, Janet Hogan, was convicted of his murder. A Dr. Wilson contacted Clark Kent about evidence he had found that might clear her name. Lois, suspicious of the story, secretly followed Clark and Dr. Wilson into the museum. And it was unusual to watch a cartoon with a character who had the same last name that I do. After that was the cartoon titled Jungle Drums, released on March 26, 1943, 8 minutes long. Nazi soldiers used an ancient African temple as a base where they radioed the coordinates of Allied convoys to German submarines. Lois's plane was shot down, and she was captured by members of an African primitive tribe loyal to the Nazi leader, and he portrayed a high priest that the tribe would worship, and the African tribe was portrayed in the typical racial stereotype common of African Americans in the 1940s. After that came The Underground World, released on June 18th, 1943. It was 8 minutes 13 seconds long. The Daily Planet financed an expedition led by an explorer of hidden caverns discovered by his long-lost father. Clark and Lois accompanied the explorer, where they discovered an underground civilization of winged humanoids in these caverns. And the final cartoon of the cartoon series was Secret Agent, released on July 30th of 1943. It was 7 minutes and 39 seconds long. An undercover woman had infiltrated a Nazi spy organization. She broke her cover in order to carry information about the group to her superiors in Washington, D.C., but she was being chased by Nazi agents. This was the only cartoon in the series that did not include Lois Lane, but it is possible that Joan Alexander voiced the female agent. And that was the last cartoon of the series, and even though the latest edition of the Superman cartoon series is marked Max Fleischer's Superman 1941 to 1942, this series actually lasted from 1941 to 1943. And in the show notes, I will include about 5 links to websites that include information about the Superman cartoon series from the 1940s and were a source of information, along with Wikipedia, of course. But I use these websites to, double check Wikipedia's information. I don't know where these websites got their sources, so if they got their information from the same source, there's always a chance that some of it may be an error. So I just want to let you know so you can keep that in mind. Next week, we return to An Imaginary Summer, and the story we will feature is Superman's Other Life from Superman number 132, the October 1959 issue. It was reprinted in The Greatest Superman Stories Ever Told, the 1987 edition. Showcase presents Superman Volume 1 and Superman, the Greatest Superman Stories Ever Told, Volume 2. This concludes another episode of the Superman Fan Podcast. You can find the home website at supermanfanpodcast.mypodcast.com. Expanded show notes are at supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. And you can send your email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. Episodes can also be found on iTunes and most other podcast aggregators, as well as the Internet Archive at archive.org. The theme to the Superman Fan Podcast is Plans in Motion, composed by Kevin MacLeod, part of the royalty-free music library found at incompetech.com. I also have a spoiler-free comic book review blog of the titles I read every week, which can be found at mypolllist.blogspot.com, and you can send email about this blog to mypolllist@gmail.com. Superman and all related characters are trademarked and copyright of DC Comics. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Superman Fan Podcast, and as always, thanks to Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.